The Massachusetts Safe Routes to School program is a free service of the Massachusetts Department of Transportation, which promotes healthy alternatives for children and parents in their travel to and from school. We'd like to welcome those whose communities are already involved in Safe Routes to School. And if you're not a partner, we invite you to join the over 275 partners across Massachusetts. To do so, simply call your Safe Routes School coordinator at 1-888-4-COMMUTE. The Massachusetts Safe Routes School program provides the framework, resources, and support for comprehensive and successful programs to take root and grow in a sustainable manner. So we focus on 5 primary program elements, which we like to call the 5. Education involves teaching children and parents about the broad range of transportation choices, instructing them on important lifelong bicycling and safety skills, and creating awareness among drivers in the vicinity of schools. The encouragement component is using events and activities to promote healthy transportation alternatives. Examples of this include walking school buses, Walk or Wheel Across America initiatives, International Walk to School Day in October, and Massachusetts Walk and Bike to School Day, which is coming up on Wednesday, May 5th. Enforcement is partnering with local law enforcement agencies to ensure traffic laws are obeyed in the vicinity of schools, and initiating community enforcement among parents, teachers, and community members. Evaluation is a tool that we use to monitor transportation outcomes and to document trends through data collection before and after Safe Routes to School activities. And finally, engineering involves creating operational and physical improvements to the infrastructure surrounding schools that lower speeds, reduce potential conflicts with traffic, and establish safer and fully accessible crossings, walkways, trails, and bikeways. So in today's agenda, we'll be hearing from the engineering team that manages the Safe Routes to School engineering component in Massachusetts. And we'll wrap up with a Q&A session to finish things off. So throughout the presentation, if you have a question, you can just feel free to click on the chat button on the upper right-hand portion of your screen. This should open a dialog box for you to enter a question. So we'll be answering these questions during the Q&A session. And if we don't get them, we'll try to email you with the answers later on after the presentation. So because you can't see us and we can't really see you, we'd just like to open a real quick poll and find out who you guys are and how involved you are in Safe Routes programs. So real quickly, I'm just going to have a poll up asking who you are and finding out how involved you are in Safe Routes programs. If you guys can just tell us a little bit about yourself by clicking on the bar graph, that would be very useful. Again, if you have not done so already, if you just joined in, please press *6 to mute your phone line. Thank you very much. All right, I'm just going to keep the poll open for just a couple more seconds. All right, perfect. And this is great. So I'm not sure if you guys can see the results, but we're really seeing a real diverse range of audience members coming in. We've got a lot of people within the school system. We have, a bunch of people on the municipal level. And in terms of involvement in Safe Routes to School, we've got a variety of different stakeholders. Some people are very involved. Some people haven't even gotten involved at all. They're looking towards this webinar to figure out how to get involved. So I'm just going to close the poll. And all right. So thanks so much for taking part in that poll. I guess without further ado, I'm going to hand the stage over to Kevin Dandrade. Kevin, are you there? Kevin, if you're listening in and you can't respond, press #6.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can, Kevin.
Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. This is Kevin Dandrade. I'm a principal with TEC. TEC is a civil engineering company located in Lawrence, Massachusetts. And we have a team of transportation engineers, traffic engineers, structural engineers, and site planners that we bring to the table with MassDOT, the Massachusetts Department of Transportation, with other team members to look at the infrastructure side of Safe Routes to School. We are assisted by a couple other firms currently. The Planners Collaborative, headed by Bill Schwartz and his team, as well as Von Grossman and Company, headed by Gretchen Von Grossman. Just for those of you that aren't familiar with the Safe Routes to School program, I can give you a few pointers about how this originated. This is a piece of federal legislation which looks to provide funding for folks like Ben at Mass Rides and that team that looks at the encouragement and enrichment side, as well as other funds for the infrastructure side of the program, which looks to not only plan and design, but to build improvements related to bicycling and walking. The goal is to make bicycling and walking safer and more appealing for the students in the vicinity of a particular school. The federal legislation provides for a 2-mile radius evaluation around the school. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts, because of different density, has chose to focus on improvements that might be realized within a 1-mile radius. The ultimate goal of the program is to encourage a healthier and more active lifestyle for students. There's been an increasing trend of obesity, and with the encouragement, enrichment, and other infrastructure improvements, the goal is to make it more appealing to walk and kickstart that program of activity within children. As part of this program, we implement projects and activities in order to realize those results. This whole program is managed by the Department of Transportation through the Office of Transportation Planning. We also work very closely with the Highway Division of MassDOT, both in Boston and in the various district offices. As I've already mentioned, Ben has mentioned that the outreach activities within the community is performed by Mass Rides, and TEC is assisting MassDOT by managing the infrastructure. The major elements of what we do as part of our TEC team is to go into that school community where there's already a relationship through Mass Rides to do what we call a preliminary assessment. This is more or less a planning document that looks at different elements of the sidewalk inventory near school, to look at where there may be critical crossings for students and the general public for that matter, and other elements that might encourage both bicycling and walking to school. For those projects that move forward in the program, we also do final design and assist MassDOT in managing certain elements of the construction as well. Lastly, or point number 3, is the evaluation and reporting end, which is very important for evaluating the success of the program. This involves both a pre-construction and post-construction assessment to look at how the population of walkers and bicyclists may have increased as a result of the infrastructure program. Some other tidbits on the next slide, which is we've started with MassDOT and been actively working since January of 2008. We just started our 3rd year of that contract. There's been a lot of activity over the past 2 years. The request for assessments goes out through Mass Rides to the principals in the area throughout the Commonwealth that have been part of the program for at least a year. That's been the part of the protocol that was set up early on in the program. We have initiated 35 different school assessments around the Commonwealth. We performed all the site visits for those schools, rounds 1 through 3. As part of that process, we've met with parents, school staff, municipal staff to look at what the current challenges are. We've identified projects within each community and are currently refining some of those projects within communities, which is part of the natural progression of a project. You have ideas starting out, refine them with staff and with other interested stakeholders to create the final document. That document is then used to advance certain projects into design and construction. We're very much looking forward to our next round of solicitations. The 4th round of the Safer School Infrastructure Assessment Request is actually due on March 18th. So for those of you on the call that have not yet entered as part of the infrastructure program, we would encourage you to complete that questionnaire, and it's very brief, and then submit that back through Mass Rides. We are looking at 10 to 15 schools in this next round to advance into the initial planning phase. I have a wonderful team that supports us in this program. We're working with Jim Cope at MassDOT, who is the program manager. Underneath the TEC umbrella, you will hear in a moment from Jennifer Williams. We have her managing a lot of the planning assessments, and Michael Myers from my staff, who is managing a lot of the engineering designs. But collectively, we're very excited to be part of the program. We're looking forward to seeing more and more of these enter into construction And without further ado, I will introduce you to Jennifer Williams with my staff to talk about some of the things that we look at when we first start a school assessment. Jennifer?
Hi, Jen. If you have any tough time with this, you can just press #6 to unmute yourself. Hi, everybody. I think we're just experiencing a couple of technical difficulties. Hopefully we'll get it resolved in a second. Again, if you haven't muted your phone already, please press *6. Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, we can hear you, Jen. Thank you.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. Okay, well, as Kevin said, my name is Jennifer Williams, and I work for TEC. We are the engineers working on the Massachusetts Safe Routes to School program. A little bit about me. I have worked with TEC for about 6 years and working on the Safe Routes to School program for a little over 2 years. I'm a member of the American Pedestrian and Bicycle Professionals, and in 2008 I was certified as a National Safe Routes to School course instructor. And on the personal end, I participate in the Trek Across Maine, which is a cycling event every spring where we ride from Sunday River to Belfast on the coast. So I have a little bit of personal interest in what we encounter here as part of this program too. So for those of you who may have missed it, this webinar is actually a rebroadcast of a presentation that we gave at the Safe Routes to School Forum back in November. That forum was held at the Marriott in Newton, and we felt that the location of that hotel lended itself well to actually pretending that the hotel was a school. And so this presentation will be a virtual walking audit where we will take a look at the neighborhood adjacent to this imaginary school, if you will. So we dubbed it the Newton Riverbend School for the purpose of this presentation. And here's a map of the walking audit that we will be virtually going on today. We'll cover several points of interest along the way. So at the first stop here, we are at basically the intersection of the driveway to this hotel or school and Commonwealth Avenue, which in Newton, this location, again, is about 10 miles outside of Boston. We're relatively close to the I-95, I-90 interchange, so you can imagine, in the morning and afternoons, there would be a considerable amount of traffic passing through here. Some of the problems that we noticed at this location, I'll show you on the slide. The photo here on the left is the existing condition photo. So this shows you kind of in the background is the driveway, and in the foreground is a picture of this crossing across Commonwealth Avenue. Things that we noted here, there's no crosswalk. There are sidewalks on both sides of the street in this location. There are no sidewalks currently along either side of the driveway. There is a median in the road, but there's no defined protection here for pedestrians to wait in as they cross the street. So in the photo on the right-hand side, we've used Photoshop to kind of help picture what we would recommend for this location and some solutions that we would add here. So you'll notice the addition of sidewalks along the driveway, new crosswalks, new ADA-compliant wheelchair ramp on either side, and a new pedestrian warning sign, which in this case is a static sign, meaning that it just stays in one place. But this would also be a good candidate location for what we call a flashing pedestrian warning assembly. So that would be similar to the sign, but with the addition of some flashing lights to help grab drivers' attention. as we continue along the route, we come to stop number 2, and this is on the corner of Auburn Street and Commonwealth Avenue. And there's a gas station here. This intersection is signalized, and you'll see some photos here from this intersection. So some of the things that we liked about this intersection, we felt that the construction of the sidewalk, which you can tell from the photos, is fairly new. We felt that it had a good continuous level sidewalk surface all the way around the gas station parcel, and that the driveway aprons were constructed appropriately and with regard to pedestrians on the sidewalk. In the photo on the right-hand side, you can see the signal, the traffic signal. We liked the addition of the new ADA compliant ramps here and fairly new crosswalks. And also to note, with the signal, there is a concurrent pedestrian phase built in. So what this means is, pedestrians are allowed to travel back and forth over the intersection concurrent or parallel to traffic there on Commonwealth Avenue. There's also the option for an exclusive pedestrian phase, which we did not find at this intersection, but does exist in some others, where pedestrians would have an exclusive phase, so no traffic would be allowed through the intersection, and it would be open to pedestrians only. Here at our third stop, we encountered a raised crosswalk, which also looked fairly new, and we will take a look at that. So here's the raised crosswalk. You can see it's built up over the rest of the roadway surface. This particular crosswalk has a brick walking surface. They don't always have that, but this was kind of a nice addition there. Some of the other things that we liked about this particular point of interest, we felt that it was a good use of the MUTCD requirements for pavement marking and signage. So you can see the pavement markings on either side approaching the crosswalk, and then also the yellow-green high visibility signs up in the upper right-hand corner. One thing that may be a little bit difficult to see in the photo, but that we noticed in the field, the sign that says raised crossing ahead, this sign actually had a series of LED lights around the outside of it that were powered by solar panels, and these lights flash continuously to help raise awareness for drivers that the presence of pedestrians may be near. Another thing that we felt was attended to well on this crosswalk, there is good visibility from the ramp on at least one side. The other side is kind of cut out of the photo. It didn't have quite as good sight lines. But for someone standing at that ramp waiting to cross, there were good clear lines of sight between both the pedestrians and any oncoming drivers. And one thing that we would look for, not just in this location, but as we go out to different schools and make visits, we always look for these clear lines of sight at crossings. But try and keep in mind also that, a lot of the population and the people that we're looking to help cross here are children, and they have a shorter, shorter stance, a smaller point of view, and so it's important to keep that in mind when we consider sight lines. Another good point here at this raised crosswalk is the addition of a new catch basin here on the west side of the crosswalk. And this is important whenever you add any type of raised structure, that you take into account the drainage to make sure that it does not impound any storm water, which helps deteriorate the materials and also could lead to freezing in the winter. So here at stop number 4, we will encounter some good examples of sidewalk treatments, and we'll talk a little bit about sidewalk maintenance and some other items that we often find along sidewalks. So here in the photo on the left this was actually taken from this spot on the walking audit route. The photo on the right was taken at one of the schools that we have already visited as part of the infrastructure program. And we decided to show both of these photos because we felt that they were good examples of the different types of sidewalk materials that we often encounter. So on the right you see a concrete treatment, and on the left is an asphalt sidewalk. So clearly the sidewalk on the right is a little bit older than the concrete sidewalk, but this is one example of what can happen when you have a sidewalk adjacent to these large and growing street trees. The concrete sidewalks, both sidewalks require different levels of maintenance. Concrete sidewalks tend to be a little bit more expensive to install, but a little more durable. The asphalt sidewalks tend to be a little bit more flexible, and due to that, you can see oftentimes that's affected by tree roots. Another point of interest here would be the fact that oftentimes constructing sidewalks along streets require some temporary easements to be able to construct the sidewalk, and oftentimes we encounter some right-of-way issues with abutters and the need for some agreements there to be able to accommodate the sidewalks. We'll talk a little bit about this with one of the layer sides also. And in the photo on the bottom, this again was taken at this location along the walking audit route. You'll see a short retaining wall and a couple steps there leading up to a walkway. So this is important to notice because oftentimes we find these types of things, whether it's retaining walls and walkways or mailboxes or signposts or different types of trees or vegetation. We need to take all of these into account when we look at doing a sidewalk project, whether it be a reconstruction or a new sidewalk. This retaining wall here is holding back part of this lawn and allowed these trees to be saved when the sidewalk went in. There's also options. It's not always necessary to put in a wall. There are options for grading with different slopes that you can use if a wall is not always necessary. Stop number 5 along this route. We've come off of Auburn Street and we're now on to Bourne Street, which is a little bit more residential, has a little bit less traffic, slower speeds, and we felt that this location was a good example of some of the types of sidewalks that we would look for. So here in the large photo on the left, you see kind of a typical suburban sidewalk. And if our infrastructure team was to come to your neighborhood and see this type of environment, this is kind of what we look for. This is what we shoot for. So we may not necessarily recommend an improvement project here unless there was some other outstanding feature. Every neighborhood's a little bit different, but this is a pretty good idea of what we look for. Things like the addition of a grass strip, which acts as a buffer between anyone walking on the sidewalk and the traffic. In this case, that includes some street trees in places. We felt that the surface of the sidewalk again was continuous and level and lend itself well to safe walking and or bicycling. As in any neighborhood, oftentimes we encounter these sidewalk obstructions, and you'll see one example of those in the photo on the right, things like trash cans. This could also be, snowbanks in the winter. Sometimes people park incorrectly and they may obstruct the sidewalk in some way. It's normal. This is what happens, when you live in a residential neighborhood. There are different ways to try and help prevent some of this, but in general, this is not as big a problem as some of the others that we encounter. Lastly, to notice, excuse me, the street part here, there's no curbing separating the grass strip from the street, and sometimes we would recommend the addition of curbing. In this case, we don't necessarily feel that it's needed, and that's because the traffic, again, on this street is mostly residential, fairly slow speeds, and there's already that good buffer between pedestrians and vehicles. Moving along, we're at stop number 6, and at this point we're kind of starting to head back towards the school. We've turned off of Bourne Street onto Phillips Street, and there's a couple things to notice here. One, this short section of side street acts as a good connection between the residential neighborhood that we just saw in some of the photos and kind of the main road, Commonwealth Avenue that leads out towards the school. There's a couple of trees. We'll talk about some tree issues and talk about how we would recommend a sidewalk addition on the street. So here again on the left, you can see a photo of the existing section of Phillips Street, and the photo on the right has had a sidewalk added to it. On the left, again, you can see where the existing sidewalk stops, and then there's kind of this grass strip that leads out towards Commonwealth Avenue, which is at the end of Phillips Street. Just in order to install a sidewalk here, which we felt would be a good improvement to this neighborhood, in order to connect it, back towards the school, we first would have to look at the idea of either protecting or possibly removing the group of trees there on the left-hand side. Again, every neighborhood, every sidewalk project is a little bit different. Oftentimes, we are able to make our design somewhat flexible and able to save some of these larger street trees. That's not always possible, and that happens for some different reasons. But in this case, the photo on the right, the rendering on the right, is taken just above that group of trees. You'll also notice the addition of vertical granite curb here, and that again helps to kind of separate the travelway from the sidewalk, along with that grass strip that we've added in. And again, here with the grass strip, in some cases where we feel that it's really important to work around some street trees or other, things adjacent to the sidewalk, sometimes we have a little bit of flexibility as far as whether or not we put that grass strip in and how wide it may be. Ideally, we like to have that because it acts, again, as that separation, but like I said, it's not always possible. A couple of other things to note: where this sidewalk crosses over the driveway, this is the residential driveway there that you can see on the right-hand side. One thing that would be really important for us to consider would be the drainage. So we want to make sure that by the addition of this curbing and the slope work associated with the sidewalk that we're not changing the drainage characteristics so that, we want to make sure that no stormwater is draining into this driveway and that we're not creating a drainage problem. So it would be important to keep in mind that slope there for the entrance. And also making sure that we try as best we can to maintain to match the grade of the road with the sidewalk. And this helps keep impacts down, helps keep our costs a little bit lower. And, like I said before, it's not always possible, but that's where we start from. So we look to try and, keep our projects as consistent with the surrounding environment as possible. All right, so as we walk down Phillips Street, we come out to the end and we'll take a slight left here onto Commonwealth Avenue. And we'll talk about another sidewalk project, a little bit about the difference between the sidewalk and a multi-use path, and get into the easement issue a little bit more. Okay, so the photo here that you're seeing on the left, again, is taken from this location, and the photo on the right is a rendering of a typical improvement project that we may recommend if we were to come and encounter this type of situation. So things to note on the left, you see there's kind of a stone dust path here, a worn walkway. This shows us that there's evidence of people traveling here, which would indicate a good place to locate a sidewalk. That path has kind of been naturally offset from the curb, and you can see that we've designed in the grass strip again there in the photo on the right. Based on the proximity of this section of sidewalk to the school, I'll show you again here. We'll just go back a slide. You can see that, overall it's not all that far away. So we tend to find that some of the projects that we encounter that are closest to the school, it's best to assume a use by the largest number of students. So in this case, we may consider making a sidewalk wider than what's required as a minimum, so that would be 5 feet, or making that into a multi-use path, which is typically about 10 feet wide and designed to accommodate all types of, pedestrians, bicyclists, strollers, wheelchairs, all different types of transportation except for cars. And then in the photo on the right, you can also see this dashed red line, which we included as kind of an approximate limit for what we would envision as a temporary construction easement. And I talked about that briefly earlier, but basically what this is an agreement between the neighbor or the abutter, adjacent landowner, and the proponent of the project, which would allow construction equipment, vehicles, whatever is necessary to construct that sidewalk. In this case, there's kind of a hill that slopes up towards the left there. So, depending on how wide a sidewalk we put in, that limit may change. But those easements are agreed upon, obviously before any construction is started. As part of the Massachusetts infrastructure program, we require that any easements necessary like this be handled between the municipality and that adjacent landowner. So the Massachusetts Safe Routes to School program would cover the cost and the process for the design and also the cost for the construction. But we ask that the local city or town take the lead on coordinating that effort with any abutters. Lastly, I would point out that, again, in this rendering, we show a concrete sidewalk surface. And we chose this surface because in this location, further down the road, there's existing concrete sidewalk, and also on the opposite side of Commonwealth Avenue, we notice concrete sidewalk. So, again, in an effort to, keep materials consistent, we would recommend that in this case. And now we're back at school. We're back at the hotel. So that's kind of the end of our walking audit route. But just to kind of summarize some of the things that we typically look for when we go out and make this type of visit. Again, we look for things like accessibility. These would be the new ADA compliant ramps that we showed in a couple of the earlier photos. This is really important that we make any of our improvement projects ADA compliant. Oftentimes this means, including an entire intersection instead of just one corner that we may otherwise focus on. We look for missing links in existing sidewalk infrastructure, so trying to make a complete route and make a walking or bicycling route as short as possible by recognizing some of those missing links. We always look for crosswalks. Are they in a good location? Do they have good visibility, between the pedestrians and the drivers at either end? Are the pavement markings there up to date? Are they visible? Is there appropriate signage? Things like that. And again, pavement markings oftentimes refers back to the crosswalks, but that can also include things like the pavement markings that you saw on the raised crosswalk, pavement markings indicating a school zone, things of that nature. Signage is very important. This really helps add another dimension to, making drivers aware of pedestrians, whether, again, if it be at a crosswalk, school zones, speed limits, no parking, that's a big one, or allowing parking. That's something else that we keep in mind, and we try and always recommend as up-to-date signage as possible. We talked about sight distance a little bit, and especially keeping in mind the presence of children. This is really important when you're thinking about, how do drivers see pedestrians, how do the pedestrians see the drivers, making sure that that line of sight is clear in all directions. And that's enforced, again, by, some of the programming aspects that Ben and the others at Mass Rides work on. I know with some of the presentations that they may give to your schools, making sure that the kids stop and look. We want to make sure that they can see what they need to see when they do that. Traffic patterns and behavior, we keep an eye out for, is it one-way, is it two-way? Do local drivers appear to be following the rules? Do we need additional signage or some other engineering elements to help enforce the kind of traffic patterns and behavior that we think are ideal? And lastly, but certainly not least, bicycle facilities. I referred throughout this presentation to most of this as a walking route. It could very easily also be bicycling route, and when we do these infrastructure assessments, we do keep in mind bicycles just like we do pedestrians. And oftentimes that includes, taking a look at, is there suitable bicycle storage at the school? What are the local policies for kids choosing to bicycle to school, and are there safe ways for them to do that? And this the graphic here on the right is a clip of a walkability checklist. Excuse me, that's available on one of the websites that I will show a link to shortly. This is something that's available to everybody, open to the public. You can go onto the walkinginfo.org website and download this. You could use this if you're a teacher, if you're a parent, you could go out with your child and take a look at some of these things and check them off, which kind of helps self-evaluate your neighborhood. If you are either, maybe you're waiting for the infrastructure team, or you recently applied as part of the round 4 to receive an infrastructure assessment, this is something that you could do, on your own time, whenever it's convenient. There's also available a similar checklist for bikeability, so those are 2 options available. And again, here are some other websites there are some good resources for different parts of the Safe Routes to School program. Ben mentioned their website, which can be accessed on commute.com. The next two links are to the Safe Routes to School program kind of at the national level. The bicycling info and walkinginfo.org websites are where you will find those checklists that I just mentioned. And the last link links directly to the MUTCD website, which is the manual for uniform controlled devices, and this is the federal guideline that we follow for all signage and pavement markings and a whole lot more. And there's a new edition out for that as of 2009. So those are all things that I would encourage you to look into if you're looking for more information on the Safe Routes to School program. And certainly if you are interested in getting your school involved or getting your school further involved, I would encourage you to contact Mass Rides and Ben Hammer and the folks over there. So I'm going to turn it back over to Ben, and he will be fielding any questions that you may have.
All right, Jen, thank you so much. That was really wonderful. Thank you for sharing all that with us. We're now going to be going to the Q&A session. And so if you guys can actually press escape on your main screen. Sorry about that. If you press escape on your main screen, it'll open up a larger screen where you can actually submit a question. So to do so, click the chat button on the upper right-hand portion of your screen. And a dialog box should appear where you can actually type in questions to us, and we'll be responding to them during the Q&A session. So I guess the first question we've got is, how do I get the infrastructure assessment at my school? We've gotten this from quite a few people so far. And I guess the best way to go over it is just tell you about the current process. So in the current process, the state periodically invites partner schools who have been participating in Massachusetts Safe Routes to School for a year to apply for an infrastructure assessment. The Safe Routes to School engineering team then completes an assessment report for selected school, and from these assessments, some schools can receive federally funded infrastructure enhancements to improve walking and bicycling conditions up to 1 mile around the school. So most recently, qualifying schools have been invited to request fourth rounds of infrastructure assessments with a mid-March deadline. So that is our current process. All right. Now we've, I guess, got a question for the engineers out there. So the question is, isn't flexibility of asphalt good? Won't trees lift anything, including concrete? So, Jen, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I should also say I'm joined by Mike Myers from our office, who, as Kevin mentioned, helps out with a lot of the design of these projects. And I would answer that question by saying, yes, tree roots can also lift, a concrete panel sidewalk, and we've encountered that in many locations. To which I would say, no sidewalk is perfect, and nothing requires no maintenance. So, those are all things to be considered when we when we talk about different types of materials and whether or not, can we protect a tree, can we keep this tree here or not, and maybe the platform for the sidewalk gets built up and over, further up and over the tree roots. But yes, the idea is that, we understand that no sidewalk is going to be built and left forever and remain in good condition. So those are all things to consider.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jen. And I've got another question coming in. What are some of the infrastructure enhancements that you've recommended for schools in the program so far?
That's a good question. We've done a lot of sidewalk reconstruction, sidewalk projects in places where we noted that the sidewalk was in such poor condition that we felt that it would act as a deterrent for kids walking or biking to school. And again, that would be both concrete and asphalt type sidewalks with and without grass panels, with granite curbing, without granite curbing. Some of the more unique treatments that we have recommended, currently there's a school in Northampton that is under construction. Their infrastructure project's under construction. We'll be installing 2 raised crosswalks out there to again act as traffic calming devices, very similar to the example that you saw in the presentation today. We've also added, again at that Northampton school, added a ramp down to an adjacent bike path, which will help connect that bike path again to the school so that people can travel back and forth between. We have recommended a lot of the pedestrian flashing assemblies that I touched on briefly, and in some cases these are what we would consider a passive detection. There's a difference between passive detection and active detection. Passive being a flashing unit that flashes when a pedestrian is nearby. That's usually done with a microwave source. It detects the presence of a pedestrian. An active flasher would be something that requires a child or a pedestrian to push a button in order to activate. And again, the lights, it's kind of a yellow ball on top of either on top of and below the standard pedestrian sign that's recommended in the MUTCD. We've recommended the addition of a lot of bike racks at schools, places where, teachers and parents and municipal officials have told us that kids would be more likely to bike to school if they had a place, a safe, secure place to store their bikes. And then, at almost every project that we're involved in, there is some element of, what we would consider signing and striping. So improving the pavement markings that are nearby and installing new signs. And we feel that really helps kind of spruce up an area, bring importance to the pedestrians and bicyclists traveling back and forth to school. So that's a pretty common one.
Thank you. Great. Thank you, Jen. And I've got another one coming in. So when engineers review potential safety projects in your schools, how do they decide which one is the top priority? Which one do they focus on first, and how do they figure that out?
When we look at a school, more often than not, the projects that we feel are the most important are the projects that will benefit the most number of students. And so, this tends to be projects that are pretty close to the school, whether it be the school driveway, a road that leads to the school, the nearest intersection to the school, just because, the majority of the kids would be traveling through this location. It doesn't mean that we haven't picked really important projects that are, a little bit further out. We set up a preliminary meeting with folks from the school and the community as part of the infrastructure assessment program that we talked about earlier. And that's really important for us as far as determining, what the neighborhood needs are. It's one thing for us to sit down at a map or photos of the area, here in our office and say, geez, this intersection looks like it needs X, Y, and Z. But, it really adds another dimension to talk to parents who walk with their kids to school or principals who field complaints or whatever, from people. It's your neighborhood, so it's important for us to get that feedback. And while that's not always the deciding factor as far as which projects are most important, it certainly helps us to be able to, kind of keep things in perspective and to recommend projects that will be appropriate for the neighborhood and also be really well used.
Thank you, Jen. Here's another question coming in. Once a project gets identified, what's the process for advancing it through to construction?
Well, I'm going to let Mike take this one.
Basically, we work with MassDOT. First thing we'll do is we send a survey crew out there, and they'll take a look at all the existing conditions and get us a base plan. Once we have that base plan, we then work on design layout for our first submission to MassDOT. And at this point, we'll then go and we'll sit down with the town and we'll show them what we have, see if they like the way things look at the preliminary stage. Once that happens, what we do is we submit a combined 25/75% submittal with MassDOT. They'll review it, submit comments to us, and then at that point we'll schedule a design public hearing. And during that whole process, we'll be addressing all MassDOT's comments. We'll go to public hearing. We'll then take comments from the public. At that point, we'll then submit a 100% submission set to MassDOT. They'll then again take a look at the construction plans that we have, and then submit comments back to us based on that submission. And then the final submission we make is called a PS&E submission, plans, special provisions and estimates. That's what that stands for. And those are basically the final set, and then MassDOT will then put the job out to contract for construction.
All right, thank you, Mike. Here's another question coming in. Can you give us concrete examples of web-based tools for mapping problem areas as a collective project? A community accessible Google Earth overlay, perhaps. We've actually got Bill Schwartz here to answer the question, so take it away, Bill.
Hi, everybody. This is Bill Schwartz from Planners Collaborative. I'm part of the TEC team. It's a great question because I think a lot of people really do like to use visual tools to compile information and to do it on their own. And right now, it's certainly possible through Google Maps to create your own maps that you can use to pinpoint specific issues. But what MassDOT did last year was to use a tool that they actually built into a website that enabled people to use the Google Maps, and pinpoint all kinds of transportation issues, not just pedestrian or bicycle issues. And if you wanted to look at it, it's available at Let's see, let me get this right here. I'm going to give you the URL that I know does work. It may not be the official one, but it's YouMove, YOUMOVE, Massachusetts.org. And if you go to, once you get to that website, if you go to there's I believe a mapping link or tell us about your transportation issues, you'll find it. What's nice about it is it enabled the people working on the project to take the information and to organize it in a number of different ways, by region, by transportation mode, by issue, et cetera. And, of course, it's available for everybody to see the results. So that's one way of doing it, and I think it's a really good way to collect the information and share it with others.
All right. Thank you, Bill. I think we just have time for one final question. And the question is, how can you work on improving the infrastructure if you don't receive an assessment through Safe Routes to School?
Well, based on, the number of schools out there and the number of schools that apply to receive an infrastructure assessment, and then, the number of schools that we can actually go out and assess, yes, there are a large number that will not receive an assessment. And I guess I would encourage people in that category to continue your advocacy work, schedule a meeting perhaps with, a local DPW director, a local town or city engineer, contact, your city councilor, all those people, and actually we've seen in a couple cases as part of conducting an assessment, I've been at a table with a principal and a town engineer, and the principal said, asking me, geez, do you guys think that, installing some new pedestrian signs and a crosswalk out here would be beneficial? And the town engineer said, well, yeah, I can do that for you. So sometimes it's just that line of communication, and that doesn't necessarily have to come from a principal. It could come from a parent or, anyone really. So I guess I would just say encourage people to contact, those at the municipal level who would be responsible for, infrastructure improvements in general in their community, and then explain, that you feel that it would be helpful for the school community, and maybe try and help get that project bumped up closer to the top of the local improvement list.
All right, thank you very much, Jen. And that's really all the time we've got for today. I'd like to thank Kevin, Jen, and Mike, and Bill here for the great work that they've done today. And I'd like to thank the audience for being, great attendees and for listening in this morning. For any questions that we weren't able to respond to this morning, we're gonna send individual emails to those who ask questions. So don't worry, we have not forgotten about you. We will get back to you. So please remember to watch for an email in which you can evaluate this webinar. We're always looking for ways to enhance our offerings, and we really value your input and advice. So thanks for attending again. If you haven't already, please contact Mass Rides to implement a safe route to school program in your community. Thank you.